security belongs to the security team, is responsible, the security team is responsible for security of the organization and the security of your solutions. Going forward, I think that is going to become more difficult because the level of security expertise, and also if you have a separate team, it's going to be, in terms of visibility as to what the solution is trying to resolve, is going to be reduced. So you might not necessarily have the same kind of level of solution that is suitable for your business case. Now, I think part of the difficulty is, is sort of a lot of organizations, particularly, that the skill sets in which the team has is going to, the skill sets from the team is quite niche, and it's not always possible to identify practitioners as well as those with sort of, for the environment that they required, as well as having a security mindset. I think, the security mindset is still relatively a recent requirement, I think, in terms of sort of feature requirements. And of course, when you're running a business, there are tactical and operational pressures, and there's always a constant need to pivot and respond to change, which those tactical pressures basically alters the sort of makes it more difficult to implement the actual strategy going forward. As a result of all of this, their privileges amongst the organization could be elevated, and especially as every organization grows and every organization evolves at some point. I think as the organization changes, those pressures, those operational pressures, plus the sort of the realities of getting people with the right skill set, meant that the effort to retain visibility and to actually ensure that the right controls and only allowing users with the controls that they need to have becomes a far more that's just the reality of the sort of organization of business and organization. So most modern the other thing is, I think, as we move forward, most organizations are digitized environments. That means that there's a bigger tech service, and technical folks, fortunately or unfortunately, are very collaborative. And, information, if there are vulnerabilities and if there are weaknesses, that information gets out very quickly. And the organization, it's the time lag between when there are issues, when an organization may or may not be attacked, is so much more condensed. Apologies, slight transition. So I think I had the privilege in my career of working, what happens when you don't implement, appropriate zero trust and limit access to least privilege and, a needs only requirement. I think, there are discussed some of the, practical realities of business that pressures business and operations teams face. And I think in many organizations, in fact, despite the best intentions, corporate networks, and I've seen this from working with different clients as well as in in-house roles, the organization, the trust between different parts of the organization becomes, elevated. Privileges becomes elevated, and even if you do segment a network, over time it becomes flat. So once you're inside, you can get anywhere. So the actual structure of the organization, I think, to me, resembles a chocolate-covered marshmallow in terms of corporate networks. You have a hard exterior, but then once you're inside, it's going to be somewhat free for all. So this, folks go, well, where have you seen this? Well, we saw it actually in 2018 for not Petra. So at that time, because of the way because Zero Trust was not implemented by, it's the corporate network basically became flat over the span of its evolution, and as the organization evolved, once the ransomware gained foothold into the corporate network, it actually encrypted all systems and devices, including the Active Directory. Fortunately, I think one copy of it was saved due to unreliable internet connection, ironically. But the organization was so close to sort of collapsing. Even though it was saved, the damage was done. It was a massive organization to rebuild the entire estate with new laptops. They had to rebuild their complete data centers. It was a massive, obviously there was significant operational impact. It was also a massive financial drain on the organization. The consultancy, the cost of consultancy, getting specialist supports, which is the right thing to do, hit 8 figures, just to make sure that, going forward, the new network will be secured and trust for different users and access to systems is locked down as much as possible. And of course, when something like that happens, there's reputational damage. However, I think the thing to be learned is you can recover from it. I think if you do the right thing, and if you have an executive team that's able to demonstrate, show that the market that you are doing the right thing, then getting the right level of external specialists, including getting the right level of external specialist support, eventually your reputation can be recovered, but it's the process itself is very painful. So for those of you who say, well, what if I sort of have elevated privileges? I think that is one of the prime examples of what happens in real life when you don't implement Zero Trust and secure by design principle to your systems. So moving on. So and that as sort of, how can public cloud help? And actually, as a part of the sort of renew and refresh process at Maersk, the organization was moving a lot of assets into the public cloud anyway. Now, public cloud are multi-tenanted environments where different organizations share the same physical infrastructure. And as a result, part of the business model is actually to separate traffic and resources for different organizations. So in a way, in terms of lease system management, is set up to allow zero trust to be implemented more easily. The other thing is, of course, if you've got a corporate system that's under your management control, I think there are operational pressures that could, basically, move the sort of the dial more towards, you're more likely to allow organizations to have elevated privilege and be able to access more systems than they require. And of course, with the public cloud infrastructure, I think one of the things that is absolutely fantastic is the sort of user community. Effectively, you are using the same system, and different users do and can share experiences, what worked, what wouldn't work. And I think having using that sort of same level of technology allows sort of communication to be done more efficiently, so that it allows the operation to be able to manage and implement the solution more effectively going forward. So some of the best practices, I think, for zero trust. I think segmenting, obviously, I mentioned that, organizations networks become flat. So segmenting network and resources is a critical zero trust best practice. So in addition to controlling access to resources, I think this can, as in the case that we've seen with MERS, it can control and at least delay potential damage from a system breach. I think with zero trust, I think one of the key things you have to do is determine a user system is who they say they are. So access to systems and resources should adhere to, least privilege principles, and management of access should be in a structured manner. For example, using access groups. These are far easier to maintain, and it really helps with subsequent review process rather than sort of the more ad hoc use of privilege access that may have been implemented in the past. I think regardless of whether you already have zero trust principle implemented, you should have monitoring in place. I think it's not always possible to detect every single all attacks, and it's not possible to give the sort of the most secure protection. So having monitoring in place allows you to sort of detect when there are issues with the organization. I think one thing that's, in terms of best practice, we need to be mindful of is that ultimately all controls add overhead, and you're always going to have residual risk. You're never going to have a perfect system. But what you want to do is do the best you can and make sure that you have a solution that is right for your business. And that also include the principle, also applies to the organization's suppliers and partners. There should really be due diligence checks on your external stakeholder to ensure that their security posture it's adhering to sort of current best practices. So I think there's a number of points in which we need to implement as practitioners of zero trust. So, as I sort of alluded to earlier, zero trust as a design principle is not a one-time thing. It needs to be maintained, and it needs to be maintained until an asset or a corporate resource has been decommissioned. I think as business organizations evolve over time, that maintenance should include part of the review process. And it shouldn't, for it to function well, you need to include everybody. I think security ultimately is the business that determines the sort of the level of risk they want to do. However, for security teams, I think we need to be that point, provide that advisory and provide that sort of subject matter expertise, so that's to the business, so that they are willing to sort of come and speak to you and allow you to sort of see what's happening in the organization, and any kind of controls that ultimately need to be placed. I think it's much easier to provide stakeholder buy-in when you have that good working relationship and getting everybody involved. I think it's important to get sort of ownership of sort of their solutions for teams, including security. I think even though they may not be the subject matter expert, they need to feel like they are part of the solution, rather than sort of this has been taken out of their hands. And finally, I think with security, as with much of security, nothing is one time. So whatever the capital investments that you make, this process needs to be maintained. And whilst shiny tools are always attractive, I think for an organization, they need to ask, do we need something, as to whether we want something? And the sort of minimizing it, I think less is in security, less is more. Minimizing the having a simpler operational environment will help with system visibility and help control operational overhead. And finally, I think how to implement the best way to implement zero trust. Culturally, I think the technical and security communities are very collaborative, and they do this through formal and informal forums. I think there are many certainly technical and technical resources available for the community. I think one of the big advantages of public cloud and how that could potentially help to embed and help individuals to implement zero trust is the large user base. So I think that people are able to leverage these offerings and work with, learn from each other. And of course, there's sort of, with public clouds, there are good reference architectures and best practice guides, which organizations can invest in. I think this sort of collaborate, and in security and in many technical disciplines, this sort of collaborative mindset actually extends to the executive team. And, they can learn from each other in terms of how, what's the best way to do things, what works and what doesn't. I think one thing, nothing stays still, and that is absolutely the case for technology. I think as an organization, best practices will change. And as an organization, I think it's important to keep your eyes and ears, and as a practitioner, on the ground, and learn from sort of whatever resources are available, including those who've got first-hand experience of working, with latest technology, speak to consultancies, work with the community, learn from the community, as in the words of John Donne, no man's an island. So we're all part of community, and we should be able to, and we should leverage and share information with the community so we can actually help each other to help us to